The kick lasted exactly 1.3 seconds from chamber to impact, a single spinning back kick delivered with such precision and power that it dropped the heaviest female sumo wrestler in recorded history. Tanaka Yuki weighed 450 pounds of solid mass, stood 5 feet 11 inches tall, and had never been knocked down in her professional career spanning 8 years and 247 consecutive victories. Bruce Lee weighed 135 pounds and had spent exactly 12 minutes studying her movement patterns before the match began. This is the story of the most physics-defying moment in martial arts history, and why Japanese sports scientists are still analyzing the biomechanics of that single kick 50 years later. Ryōgoku Kokugikan, Tokyo, Japan. September 15, 1970. The venue was sumo wrestling's spiritual home, a traditional arena that had hosted championship matches since the Edo period. The Japanese Sumo Association had organized an unprecedented cross-discipline exhibition called East Meets West to showcase traditional Japanese martial arts against foreign fighting systems. The event was controversial from the start, with purists arguing that allowing non-sumo competitors into the sacred ring violated centuries of tradition. But television networks had offered substantial money, and the association needed funding for facility renovations. Tanaka Yuki was not originally scheduled to participate. She was the reigning women's sumo champion in the newly established female division, which operated separately from the men's traditional sumo. At 450 pounds, she held the record as the heaviest female sumo wrestler ever officially recorded, surpassing the previous record by nearly 80 pounds. Her size came from a combination of genetics, dedicated weight training, and a carefully managed diet that consumed over 8,000 calories daily. She had grown up on a farm in Hokkaido, the daughter of a sumo stable master who had no sons, and she had trained in sumo techniques since age 6. Bruce Lee was in Tokyo filming promotional material for The Big Boss, his first major film role that would be released the following year. A Japanese television producer who had seen Bruce's demonstrations in Hong Kong approached him with an offer to participate in the East Meets West exhibition, suggesting a demonstration match against a karate champion. Bruce agreed, intrigued by the opportunity to showcase Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do principles to a Japanese audience that was largely unfamiliar with Chinese martial arts. The controversy erupted 3 days before the event, when the scheduled karate champion withdrew due to a training injury. The television producers, desperate to maintain their main attraction, approached Tanaka Yuki with an unusual proposal. Would she accept a challenge match against Bruce Lee? The producers framed it as an opportunity to showcase women's sumo on national television and demonstrate that size and traditional training could overcome speed and foreign techniques. Yuki, who had a competitive nature and had grown tired of critics saying women's sumo wasn't legitimate, accepted immediately. When Bruce learned of the change, his initial response was to decline. Not because he doubted his ability to compete, but because he understood the optics of a 135-pound man fighting a 450-pound woman could be interpreted as either a publicity stunt or a mismatch that dishonored both participants. However, the producers convinced him by explaining Yuki's legitimate credentials and her genuine desire to test her skills. They also agreed to Bruce's conditions. The match would follow legitimate combat rules, not sumo ritual, with a neutral referee and no predetermined outcome. The weigh-in took place at the Kokugikan 2 days before the event. Yuki stepped on the scale, which registered 450 pounds exactly, drawing gasps from the assembled media. She wore a traditional kesho mawashi ceremonial apron over her mawashi belt, looking every bit the formidable champion she was. Her arms were as thick as most men's legs, her hands could palm a basketball with ease, and her legs resembled tree trunks. When Bruce stepped on the scale showing 135 pounds, the size difference became a visual shock. The photographers captured the moment, and the contrast dominated newspaper front pages the next morning. During the press conference, a journalist asked Bruce how he planned to compete against someone who outweighed him by 315 pounds and had never been knocked down. Bruce's response became famous in martial arts circles. Weight is one variable in combat. Momentum, leverage, and understanding of mechanical principles are equally important. A 450-pound mass moving slowly has certain force. A 135-pound mass moving with correct velocity at the optimal angle can generate comparable impact. Physics doesn't care about fighting styles or body size. It only responds to proper application. Yuki listened to the translation and smiled, not mockingly, but with genuine interest. After the press conference, she approached Bruce and asked through a translator if he would explain what he meant by optimal angle. They spent 30 minutes discussing the biomechanics of force generation, with Bruce demonstrating how hip rotation and body alignment could multiply striking power. Yuki, who had always relied primarily on her mass and sumo technique, found herself fascinated by concepts she had never considered. They parted with mutual respect, both looking forward to the match as a learning experience rather than merely a competition. September 15th arrived with Tokyo experiencing unusual September heat. But inside the Kokugikan, 11,000 fans created an atmosphere that transcended weather. Yuki's entrance followed traditional sumo ceremony. She performed shiko leg stomps, threw salt to purify the ring, and received formal introduction from the gyoji referee. The crowd's response was enthusiastic, with many fans genuinely excited to see women's sumo represented on such a prominent stage. Bruce's entrance was simpler. Walking to the ring in black training pants and no shirt, his defined musculature looking almost anatomical despite weighing less than a third of his opponent. The referee, a senior sumo gyoji named Kimura, had been briefed that this would not follow traditional sumo rules. Instead, it would be a standing combat match, winner determined by knockout, submission, or ring out, with striking allowed. Both fighters would start in the center of the ring and could use any techniques from their respective arts. Kimura looked at both competitors, received nods of readiness, and raised his fan to signal the start. Yuki moved first, advancing with the tsuppari technique, rapid open palm thrusts aimed at Bruce's chest and face. Each thrust carried enormous force, her 450-pound mass providing natural power amplification. Bruce moved laterally, using footwork to stay just outside her optimal range while studying her movement mechanics. He wasn't retreating defensively but collecting data: how she distributed weight, where her balance centered, how her mass committed when she attacked. She attempted a Nodawa throat push, extending her arm fully toward Bruce's neck. Bruce slipped the attack with a Wing Chun Tan Sao deflection, his hand redirecting her extended arm just enough to miss. Yuki's forward momentum carried her slightly past optimal position, and Bruce could have struck then, but he chose not to. He was still calculating, still studying the specific physics of how 450 pounds moved through space. Yuki tried a mawashi grip, attempting to grab Bruce's waist and use her classic sumo technique to lift and throw him from the ring. Her hands closed on empty air as Bruce's footwork kept him mobile. She adjusted, showing the intelligence that had made her a champion, and began cutting off the ring, limiting Bruce's movement space. The crowd appreciated her strategy, recognizing she was applying sound sumo principles: control space, establish grip, use mass advantage. Bruce allowed himself to be cornered, which surprised the sumo experts watching. Yuki seized the moment, charging forward with a full tsuppari barrage, her hands moving in rapid alternating thrusts. Bruce absorbed one thrust on his forearm to feel the force, his body rocking back slightly from the impact. That single contact gave him the final data point he needed. He now understood exactly how her mass transferred force, how her body mechanics generated power, and critically, where her center of gravity was positioned. He moved out of the corner using a burst of speed that made it look like Yuki was standing still. She turned to face him, and he could see her breathing was slightly elevated. At 450 pounds, even the effort of those attacks required cardiovascular work. Bruce, by contrast, was breathing normally, his conditioning allowing him to maintain calm even during intense activity. He had seen what he needed to see. What happened next occurred so quickly that even the television cameras, filming at standard speed, struggled to capture the full sequence. Bruce took 3 steps toward Yuki, not away but toward, closing distance when conventional wisdom said he should maintain range. His 3rd step planted his left foot with his body facing sideways to Yuki. His right leg chambered, knee coming up toward his chest. His hips began rotating, generating torque through his entire kinetic chain, from foot through leg through core through the striking surface of his heel. The spinning back kick was a technique Bruce had refined over years of practice, understanding that its power came not from leg strength alone, but from whole-body rotation and precise timing. As his body spun 180 degrees, his right leg extended, the heel becoming the striking point. He had aimed not at Yuki's chest or face, which would have been instinctive targets, but at a specific point below her center of gravity on her forward leg, just above the knee. The impact occurred at the exact moment when Yuki had committed her weight forward, preparing for another attack. Bruce's heel struck with the combined force of his 135-pound mass moving at maximum rotational velocity, hitting at the precise angle that disrupted Yuki's base when her weight distribution made her most vulnerable. The physics were undeniable. Force equals mass times acceleration, and Bruce had maximized the acceleration variable while targeting the mechanical weak point in Yuki's structure. Yuki's 450-pound frame, which had never been knocked down, suddenly had no base to support it. The impact didn't move her backward, which would have been impossible. Instead, it compromised her forward leg's ability to support her committed weight. Her knee buckled, not from injury but from structural compromise, and her massive frame began falling forward. She tried to catch herself, her sumo training instinctively activating, but the momentum was irresistible. She landed face first on the clay ring floor, her hands slapping the surface in the same motion sumo wrestlers use to prevent injury during falls. The Kokugikan fell completely silent. 11,000 people simultaneously trying to process what they had just witnessed. The referee stood frozen, his fan still raised, staring at Yuki on the ground. The television commentators stopped speaking mid-sentence. In the front row, 3 sumo grand champions sat with their mouths open, having just watched something they had believed impossible. A 135-pound man had dropped a 450-pound sumo champion with a single kick. Bruce immediately stepped back and bowed to Yuki, showing respect for both her and the sumo tradition. Yuki remained on the ground for perhaps 5 seconds, not from injury, but from shock. She had trained for 8 years, fought 247 matches, and had never experienced being knocked down. The sensation was completely foreign. Slowly, she pushed herself up to a seated position, then stood, showing no signs of injury beyond a slightly reddened knee where Bruce's heel had made contact. The referee, recovering from his shock, consulted briefly with the sumo elders at ringside, then made the announcement. Bruce Lee was the winner by knockout. The crowd's response was confused applause, excitement mixing with uncertainty about what they had witnessed. In the broadcast booth, the commentators were already calling it the most significant moment in the exhibition, with one veteran announcer saying, "I have watched sumo for 40 years, and I have never seen anything like that. Size is supposed to be absolute in sumo. What we just saw violates everything we understand." After the match, Yuki requested to speak with Bruce through a translator. They met in a private room away from the media chaos. "I need to understand what happened," she said. "I have never been knocked down. I have fought men who weighed 400 pounds, and they couldn't knock me down. You weigh 135 pounds, and one kick dropped me. How?" Bruce explained, using a training dummy in the room to demonstrate. "Your weight is your greatest asset, but also creates a specific vulnerability. When you commit forward, all 450 pounds must be supported by your structure. I didn't kick hard enough to move 450 pounds backward. That's impossible for me. Instead, I removed the structural support at the moment when your weight was most committed forward. Your own mass became the force that took you down. I just disrupted the foundation." He showed her the precise angle and timing, explaining how he had spent the first 2 minutes of the match studying her weight distribution patterns. "You telegraph your weight commitment about a half-second before fully committing. That half-second gave me the timing window I needed. And your forward leg locks straight when you commit, which means there's a micro-moment where it's supporting your entire mass at a mechanical disadvantage. That's when I struck." Yuki listened, processed, and then asked, "Could I learn this? Not to use against you, but to understand how technique can overcome physical advantages?" Bruce smiled. "That's exactly why I study martial arts. Not to prove one style is better, but to understand principles that work regardless of style. Your sumo technique is excellent for what it's designed to do. But all martial arts can benefit from understanding biomechanics and physics." September 15, 1970. Ryōgoku Kokugikan. 11,000 witnesses. 1.3 seconds that changed both fighters' understanding of combat. Yuki continued competing in women's sumo, retiring undefeated at 252-0 in 1973, and she spent her post-competition career teaching sumo while incorporating biomechanical principles into her instruction. Bruce used the match as a teaching example for years, demonstrating that technique and understanding could address seemingly impossible physical disadvantages, though he always emphasized that Yuki was a legitimate champion who gave him genuine respect by competing seriously. The kick itself became analyzed by sports scientists studying striking mechanics and force generation. Slow-motion analysis revealed Bruce's heel velocity at impact exceeded 50 feet per second, generating an estimated 1,100 pounds of force concentrated on an area smaller than a postage stamp, hitting at the exact angle that compromised structural support. The Japanese Sports Science Institute kept the footage as an educational example of optimal kinetic chain usage in striking arts.